Excellent. How's everybody doing? Everybody in tune? This is like, I work with youth all the time. This is almost like working with the youth. They all kind of get on their phones and start doing their thing, and you're like, hello, what you doing? I think Matt put me up last because he knows I've got way more energy than most of you have at the current moment. We had one sleeping on the back table and stuff. So I've drank a 5-hour energy and a Monster just for you guys. So that way we can kind of wake you back up. I get the awesome honor on Easter weekend, on Resurrection weekend, to talk to you about the Shroud of Turin, which has become one of my favorite subjects. I know I don't quite look like the guy on the picture because somehow Matt resurrected, a picture of me from when I was a coach like 10 years ago. So I was like 140 pounds and really healthy, and now I look like this. I was like, where'd he get that picture from? And it's me getting to throw a baseball. I was like, oh, they're not even going to know that's the same guy when I get up there, but that really is me. The Shroud of Turin, about 10 years ago, I picked up a book written by Gary Habermas, and it started me on this kind of hunt to see what is this, because I had read about it in the papers and in the magazines. When I got around to the research, what I kind of came up with was, well, it was rendered as a medieval forgery, and let's just move on. I read Gary's book and I thought, wait, hold, stop the presses, wait a second. And it really started me on this hunt. But let me tell you what the Shroud of Turin is, because a lot of people have kind of heard it, but they don't know what it is. It's a 14.5 foot by about 4 foot long cloth. And what it did was it was purportedly wrapped around the body of Jesus as the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I need to explain a couple of things about the imagery that you'll see on here. This video is going to kind of help just explain it in a second. This is how they kind of wrapped him up. But this video will help explain a lot.
1532. Chambéry Cathedral, France. For its safekeeping, the Savoy family puts the shroud in a casket and hides it in a crypt behind a grille with 4 locks, each with a separate key. But on December 15th, a fire blazes through the cathedral. Clergymen frantically search for the 4 keys, but to no avail. Finally, a blacksmith is summoned and manages to free the shroud. But not before the metal casket has started to melt and drip on the folded cloth inside, scarring it forever with burn holes and scorch lines down both sides of the image.
The shroud was actually in 2 fires. In 1998, it was in another fire, and that fire didn't suffer any damage like it did back in the 1400s. But what you're seeing basically is that I put an illustration of the paper angels there, because what you're seeing is these are all burn marks that were so bad right through here that the nuns actually cut out the worst part of the burns and sewed back into it a patch. In essence, it's like when your jeans go to start ripping, if you don't sew a patch on there, it'll continue to fray. So what they do is they cut out the worst part. So you'll see these patches, but they'll line up together because the cloth was folded in half. We'll see an illustration on that, folded in half again. So these patches match those down here. These 2 match down there. These match these right here because of the way they were folded over. That's what those are right here. Then you've got scorch marks, you've got water stains all over the cloth. Okay, so that's kind of what you're looking at. What most people don't see right off the bat is you have a head right here, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, a beard. You've got 2 arms crossed over right here. You've got the legs coming down. And on the back side, you have a head here. You have the back right here, the small of the back, the buttocks, the knee pit right here, and the ankles are down here. You actually have an image of a man that's kind of scorched into the cloth. Okay, so that's what you're looking at right here. We need to really tackle the subject, is this a medieval forgery? Because that's what everybody wants this to be that's on the secular world. If they could dismiss this as a medieval forgery, let's just move on. There's no sense in talking about it anymore. So let me give you kind of a basis on where we were at in the 14th century. In 1420, the oil painting was invented. Up until that point, there was no art on canvas with oils. That's how unadvanced we were at that point. The Gutenberg press was invented in 1455, and of course allowed us to get out the Bible in mass print and everything else. In 1498, the bristle toothbrush was invented. Now, I had to stop and think, what did they do beforehand? Did you just kind of take your finger and stop and think somebody had to invent a toothbrush? But that's where technology was. So keep this in mind as we move forward, looking into some of the science behind this. And let me say this. A few years ago, I actually removed some of the evidences from my presentation because Barry Schwartz, who you'll hear me mention quite a bit, he convinced me of something. He said, look, the scientific evidence, peer-reviewed scientific evidence, just for you that don't know, peer-reviewed means that it's been written in a scientific article. Other scientists have had a chance to read it, write a rebuttal, and then republish it to try and dispute what the findings are. And so everything in my presentation is peer-reviewed science, okay, that has not been able to be turned over. There were some things that are in there that are really cool, but I took them out because of the integrity of the presentation. According to Barry, you don't need those things in there, and he's absolutely right, because as you'll see, it stands alone scientifically as an anomaly more than anything, but just keep in mind where technology was in the 1400s. So, the carbon dating results. Everybody says, well, it was rendered in medieval forgery because the carbon dating back in the 80s said that. Let's see something here, though. Ray Rogers was one of the NASA scientists that was on the 1978 START team, which stands for Shroud of Turin Research Project. He wrote something called the Thermochemical Acta, and here's what he said in there. Here's an excerpt from the abstract, but what I want to focus on is this. Observations prove that the radiocarbon sample was not a part of the original cloth of the Shroud of Turin. The radiocarbon date was thus not valid for determining the true age of the shroud. Here's what they figured out. I'm going to play this video just to kind of illustrate.
Got holes in your clothes? You need Without a Trace. We're reweavers. We have a specialized skill. We repair holes and tears in damaged garments.
Watch what they do.
Reweaving is so detailed, this video had to be shown in fast forward. At this speed, you can see the expert weaving of thread strands into your garment's damaged area, creating virtually almost invisible repairs.
If you keep watching this video as I talk a little bit, what you're going to see is the French invented it's called the French invisible weaving. Centuries ago, they're able to go in and somehow their artistry can interweave inside of the existing cloth to the point where you cannot tell the difference from where the new and the old start. It's unlike a patch. They're able to intertwine the fibers in such a way where to the naked eye, it is untraceable. It's absolutely phenomenal. They've been doing this for centuries and centuries and centuries. So what happened is when they did that testing on the cloth, they took a piece of the cloth down here, a little small piece about this big, mixed into that cloth was old fibers from the original cloth, right? But then there was all these new fibers that had been mixed in very similar ways that they were trying to keep the cloth intact by putting patches. They also put invisible weaves all through the cloth. So what Ray Rogers did was he said, look, let's take each fiber apart, and there's an unreleased, unpopularized report that actually shows where another test was done, and it puts it right back to within the first century on some of those fibers that were there. That's something Gary told me about, but it's not. I can't find the published version of it, so I don't include it. But my point is this: that at the academic level, that's not an argument that anybody will use anymore. They will not say that the carbon dating was from the medieval times, and because they know that it's been dismissed, it's been turned over. So let's move on from there. And what we're going to see is this. That audio is really jumbled. Here's what she's saying. We're having a little technical problems with the audio, but nonetheless, here's what she's saying. The Shroud reports that the three different laboratories had three different dates, and we're actually dating the scientist's mother's tablecloth to be 300 years older than she had just bought it that day, and they did a test on some of the fabric, and it was 300 years old. So it was basically saying those laboratories had mixed results, and it just further skews the results to the point where it's inadmissible. The history of the Shroud. Here's the number one question that comes up about the Shroud. Where has it been? All right? And see, it's just like the most frustrating study I've ever done in my whole life. I was trying to locate the evidence of the Israelites. You ever tried to do that in Egypt? Where were they? Where is the evidence of Israel in Egypt? I looked and started getting frustrated. I'm going, I can't find any evidence for this whatsoever. They weren't called Israel yet. How are you going to find something when it wasn't termed that yet? It's almost impossible. So the Shroud of Turin, it's called the Shroud of Turin because it's stored at the Turin Cathedral in Italy. Up until that point, it wasn't called the Shroud of Turin, so where was it? There's actually a great theory. I believe Ian Wilson's the one who came up with this about the threefold method. What he's saying is, during the storage, even to this day, the cloth was folded in half. So now all you have is just a half. The other half is folded up underneath it. Very similar to the way it would have been when Jesus was placed in there. And then it was folded in half again, creating just this half and this half, and you can see that illustration there in fold number 2. Fold number 3, you end up with about a section about this big right here, and you can see that in fold number 3. Then, just like a t-shirt, if you're trying to display the art on there, you fold the sleeves back over, displaying just that image. So what we see, by the time you fold it back over, is just a face image. Well, here's what we know. In 544 AD, this artist painted a picture of the attack of the city of Edessa. And in the picture, it depicts somebody taking a ladder, going up over the city gate, and taking down. Now, the city's being attacked. They're being ransacked, and this guy is up on a ladder trying to take down this thing that we can see here. And you can see right here, he's trying to get this little face image down. Now, if your house is on fire, what do you get? What do you stop and grab? Your wallet? No, somebody said pictures. Pictures. Your wallet's replaceable, a lot of stuff's replaceable. Even your high school diploma and your college degree can be replaced in some, but you can't replace pictures. At least not the old kind. Now they're all digitally stored, so it's kind of a moot point. We'll get to that in a minute. But nonetheless, you save your pictures, the thing that's most precious to you. This is depicting something that they're saying there was something about that image of Edessa that was over the city gate that was so important that they wanted to salvage it in the midst of an attack. In the 10th century, we see another image of the image of Edessa that King Abgarus is displaying, and you can see he's holding what looks like kind of a linen piece, and it's got the face on there. Just like the threefold folded back over itself, you'll see the same image on there. So we begin to see how artwork has been influenced by this piece. The Hungarian Prey manuscript of 1192, and now keep in mind, going back to these dates, look how we got 544, and we've got the 10th century, far before the 1400s, 1500s. So we're already establishing the fact that something's been going on before that. The Hungarian Prey manuscript, this is a huge piece of evidence, 3 reasons. One is from 1192, which predates the whole medieval times thing. Secondly, we begin to see a few things develop. We see the hands crossed over, just like here, and we see the hands crossed over. We also see this herringbone weave pattern that you see kind of right in here. It's called a herringbone weave, and it's a 1st century Jewish technique that to this day the Jewish people still use that technique because of the way it forms together as such a strong bond. So we see the herringbone weave. That's what this is a herringbone weave. So it diagnoses the problem of, well, the cloth didn't originate in Jewish territory. Yes, it did because of the herringbone weave. We also have this weird thing here. See these 3 dots coming this way, and then another burn mark going that way, forms this L shape. You can see in the Hungarian Prey manuscript that it's got this L-shaped burn pattern in there, which definitely links it to the cloth. So we've got that in 1192. Now we've got 1355. We're actually seeing what's depicted as the entire image. You see the front and the back on this pilgrim's medallion. Okay. Once again, 1355, predating it. We move on to this is one of the coolest ones. This was a gold Byzantine coin struck between 693 and 695 AD. The coin's on the left, the shroud's on the right. Watch what happens when you superimpose this. It's a perfect fit. Now, hear me loud and clear. This does not prove that the shroud is Jesus. All this proves is that whoever artist was painting or forging these coins believed that they were creating the facial image of Jesus based on that. Doesn't prove it's Jesus. It just proves they thought they were recreating an image that was known to be Jesus Christ. Okay? We get to this one, and this is out of St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai from 550 AD. Now here's the thing. If you're caught on film and it's a blurry image that can't quite peg you to the crime, it takes 22 points of congruence to convict somebody in a court of law. The distance from the forehead to the nose, or the distance from the forehead to the mouth, or the nose to the mouth, the width of the mouth, the width of the eyes apart from each other. These are points of congruence, right? 22 points is all it takes to convict somebody in a court of law to uphold for a conviction. This has over 200 points of congruence between the picture of the shroud and the painting. Once again, this does not prove it's Jesus. It's not what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is for a long time there was this image floating around that they would hold up, and the artists believed they were painting or making it a depiction of Jesus. So we've got the influence of the shroud throughout the years, known as the image of Edessa, or the Mendelian of Edessa is what they called it. So the image on the shroud, what is it? I'm going to kind of blow my cover, give away the end of the presentation. What isn't it is what I can better describe to you. Because after all these years, they still don't know. So I see you sitting there going, well, wait a second. So you're just some amateur trying to give some presentation. You have no idea what you're talking about. They must know what it is. Let me give you Barry's view on this.
It wasn't a painting.
I don't know what's up with the audio. Barry said, I'm going to have to just skip over a whole bunch of audio on some of it because somehow or another we got something crossed up here. Barry turns around and says, after 30 years, we still don't know what it is. You have the world's largest scientists that are tackling this thing, trying to figure out exactly what it is, and they don't know. So we're going to try and answer the question, what isn't it? Because the artists or the skeptics have been saying, well, it's a artwork of some sorts. It's got pigment. They've been trying for decades to dismiss this thing, and if they could, it's just another way that they kind of kick the Christian to the curb and say, get out of here, we don't need you anymore, but they can't do it. The Secondo Pia in 1898, he took a picture of the shroud, and when he got back to his darkroom, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall, because when he got back to the darkroom, he puts it under the solution, and he begins to develop the negative, and what pops out of it is a positive image of a man. That's Barry taking a picture of it in 1978. The image is actually a photo negative, okay? This is easier in this room because everybody's at least old enough to remember a little bit about what a photo negative is with this thing. I get a room full of kids and I say, a photo negative, and they all look at me like this because they're so used to taking a picture and within 5 seconds they're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever they're putting on. Back in the old days, you'd have to make a photo negative from it first. And to illustrate that, I kind of got this picture here because what a photo negative is, it's a swapping of the lights and darks. Where there's a dark, a light takes its place, and so on and so forth. What the actual image of the shroud is a photo negative. When you take a picture of it, put it into a negative form, a positive image of a man pops out. Okay, so here, I see a couple people like, hold on. Here's what I'm saying. The original image is in a negative form. So that when you take a picture of it and put it into a negative form, it reverses itself into a positive. That's really hard to wrap your mind around, isn't it? Now let me tell you this. How could you have wrapped your mind around that in the mid-centuries, or the medieval time? How could you have done that? Because if there wasn't such a thing as a photo negative, which we didn't come about until the 1800s when the camera was invented, how could you conceptualize what a photo negative is? It would have been like me saying, would you create for me a machine that in about 300 or 400 years will exist? It's called Zuma Booba 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 Fuba, and I need you to make me that machine. You'd be like, what's a Zuma Booba 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 Fuba? And I'd be like, in 500 years it's going to make sense. You would look at me like I'm a nut, because there's no way for your mind to conceptualize what that machine is until it comes. How in the world could a medieval forger have made the original image in a negative format before the invention of the camera, which showed us what a photo negative was? That's almost impossible to conceptualize. You would have had to have been way smart to pull that off. But here's the thing. That's just the start of it. It gets even better than that. Man, I really wish my videos were working, because I like letting the experts speak for themselves on some of the stuff, because we're going to get into some other stuff that, I mean, it just blows my mind. The image is superficial. This is the best way I can explain it. It's on the first two microfibers. Now let me break this down for you. A microfiber is actually what comprises a thread. How many of you have tried to thread a needle before? Have you ever gotten to the point where you thread the needle and you think you're there, you try to pull it through and some of the fibers stay behind, and you're like, and you got to start over and you're trying to lick it to get all the fibers to stick together? That's because they're made up of microfibers, which are all twisted together. Sometimes there's dozens, sometimes there could be hundreds of microfibers spun together to make a single thread. I'm not saying that the image is on the single thread. I'm saying it's on the first two microfibers of one thread. Now here's the thing. There's no pigments, dyes, inks, oils, or anything that an artist could use to do it. Nothing has been found on the shroud to link it to some sort of an artist composition like that, or a compound, in order to do that. So we have to invent some sort of a compound in order to put the image on there that doesn't exist because we can't find it. But any artists in here? Okay, I'm going to tell you this. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to paint me this in a negative format. But you have to do it in a non-conceptual way because we're way before that. But you're going to do it with 1 horsehair wide brush, just 1 horsehair. Most brushes have dozens and hundreds, some of them thousands of horsehair. I'm going to give you just 1 horsehair brush. You can't use any pigments, paints, dyes, stains, or oils, right? And then you have to do it from about 10 feet away, like this, and only get it on the first 2 microfibers of the image. And here's why you have to be 10 feet away, is because the closer you get to the image, and I challenge you to do this after I'm done talking, it starts to disappear. You can't make out the lights and the darks. The more you get away from it, the more you can. So you have to paint the first 2 microfibers with a 1 horsehair brush with a substance that's unknown in a way that you couldn't have conceptualized. You see how it's starting to become impossible? It gets even better. The VP8 analyzer is a machine that NASA used to use back in the day when they would send up a very special type of machine that would take a very special photograph of Mars, let's say. Before we could send the rovers there, they would take a picture. They would bring it back and put it inside this unit, and that photograph would then be analyzed, and it would spit out a topographical map. It's a very special photograph, a very special machine that would spit out a 3-dimensional topographic map so we could know the highs and the lows of Mars before we ever sent a rover there. Here's the thing. It must be used with photography or a photograph specifically made for this type of analysis. Okay? It has to be used. Here's what happens with the Shroud. He says something crazy. He goes, the Shroud is a database of information. And I'm thinking, by the time I saw that show, it was called The Real Face of Jesus, I'm thinking, now, I know a lot about the Shroud. And I know the image is superficial. How can it store a database of 3-dimensional information on a superficial image? But yet that's what it does. The Shroud is comprised of a database of information that when put into the VP8 analyzer spits out a topographical picture of a man in perfect format. You can see the head right there on the left and how perfect that is. When you take a picture of a person and you put it into the VP8 analyzer, because of the light and dark differences, it spits out this really discombobulated picture. You can't even tell it's a person barely. But with this, you put it in there. Okay, back up. It's made of some non-conceptualized negative format with no paints, dyes, or anything else in a superficial manner, and now it's got 3-dimensional qualities to it. Could it be a medieval forgery? I don't get how you can begin to hold on to that theory any longer. The Real Face of Jesus was a show that I actually approved 99% of their content. A lot of the times when you see a Shroud of Turin show, they spend more time trying to tear it down and with a lot of false information at that than they do build it up. But anyways, they were able to extract the information and they came up with their own kind of rendition on what he would have looked like. My argument is I think his skin color would have been a lot darker, but nonetheless, that's what they came up with. So what could have scorched the image on the Shroud? I mean, what could have put it there? I mean, that's what we're trying to get down to. How did it form, right? Well, what could have... I got to skip over this video, but what he's saying is this. They're the closest they've come. This is the closest they've come, is that it's an X-ray image. And here's how this began to start. Gary was actually given a presentation. Gary Habermas was given a presentation one time, and Mark Antonacci was there, who's way deep in the research in this, trying to unpack it all. There's a dentist sitting on the front row. Gary shows a picture of the face, and the dentist stops in mid-presentation, and he goes, hey. I wish I was there, because, Gary, I would have loved to have seen how Gary handled that, Yes, the guy says, I know what that is. Gary said, well, please tell. He goes, I've been doing x-rays of teeth for decades. I've done a lot. It's an x-ray. But the thing that he told Gary is, you have to, and I've had this done, it's called a pan array, because the mouth is convex, so you can't shoot it this way. Once again, when you try and shoot it that way, you get this discombobulated picture of an x-ray. You have to put the x-ray substance inside the mouth and shoot it outwards to take a picture going this way, and it takes a series of pictures in order to perform what's called a pan array of the mouth. And when you put the side by side, you can actually count the teeth on the Shroud of Turin, and then this is superimposed with a skull next to it, where you can actually see the rows going around. So that started off a whole series of testing going, wait a second, that would explain a lot of different things, because here's the thing, at first the forger, the skeptics were saying, well, it's a forgery because the fingers are way too long. And they're right. If that was a painting of somebody's hand, the fingers are way too long. But when you take an x-ray, look at how long the fingers are. Your fingers come way back into here. They don't stop here at the skin. They come way back into here. Wait a second. That might help answer how the fingers are so long if this is some sort of an x-ray. Notice something, there's a lot of different things about the shroud that would have had to have been known by somebody, once again, in the medieval times, about human anatomy. Things like this. Where's the man's thumbs? Guy has no thumbs. He's crossed over, and his thumbs are completely gone. Why? Well, I guess the forger forgot something. He was having a bad day. He got a lot of stuff right, but he had a bad day there. No, here's the thing. The median nerve, or the space of death dot right here has the median nerve running right through it. If you take and press there, you'll feel pressure on your thumb right here. When the spike went through, which I agree that there's no way it would have gone here. That was an interesting... Was that Greg who was talking about? I'm going to have to go and look into that about the hands coming behind the cross. I thought that was really interesting. But nonetheless, I don't know of a scholar that agrees that the spike would have gone through here because it was impractical as far as it would have ripped out. So they put it through the space of death dot right there. The median nerve collapsed as soon as they drove the spike straight through there. It collapsed and collapsed the thumbs on itself. It lost the ability to spring out as a thumb would and collapsed upon itself. So why doesn't the guy have thumbs? Because that's a true depiction of somebody who would have been crucified by a spike going through the space of death dot. There's things like this. One of the first things I ever noticed when I got this display was in the knee pit. You can see the wound marks. This man was severely beat, badly beat. I mean, flesh ripped open, beat. There's no markings in the knee pit. Well, if he was tied to a post like this, like what we believe he would have been, you can hit everywhere else, but you can't hit the knee pit. Somebody would have had to have put a lot of thought into all these different details in order to fool people who we would never even have been here to see, like us. And at this modern time where we can scientifically test it, that was a lot of thought to put into stuff like that. Or could it be the real deal? So the best we can possibly come up with is this next video that won't play, unfortunately. Try and see if it'll... Give me some
marks on the shroud. Simply
this one's going to play. I'm so excited.
The Telegraph reports the scientists say the technology that would have been needed to create the marks on the shroud simply was not available in medieval times. They concluded that the exact shade, texture, and depth of the imprints on the cloth could only be produced with the aid of ultraviolet lasers, technology that was clearly not available in medieval times. In case there was any doubt about the preternatural degree of energy needed to make such distinct marks, the report spells it out. This degree of power cannot be reproduced by any normal UV source built to date.
So we can send a rover to Mars. We can clone humans. We can grow limbs and petri dishes, but we can't make a machine that can produce enough ultraviolet radiation to create this image to date. We still don't have the technology available. So let's reverse it back to the medieval times. All the things that they would have to overcome in order to create this. One of them is a monumental task of producing enough UV radiation to create the image with the light-dark differences that it does. We still don't have it. So how could that have been? So could it be a medieval forgery is the question. I just don't think it can be. So here's one of the things that I want to begin to tie together for you. How closely can we connect it to the Lord? How closely can we do that? The pollen samples, that's Max Fried up on the top left. He had a very specific, Scotch made him a very specific tape that he could stick down without damaging the cloth to pull off some of the samples of what's on there. And here's some of what they found. On the bottoms of the man's feet is a lime dust, or not lime dust. Yeah, it's a lime dust that is only found in Jerusalem. Only in Jerusalem is that dust found. So the forger would have had to have gone to Jerusalem, grabbed some dust, and tapped it on the bottom of his feet in order to make sure that he fooled us good. But here's what this is saying. These pollen samples, is this going to play maybe?
Avinoam Denis was asked to review Fry's research. His findings call into question the theory that the shroud originated in 13th century Europe.
There are two very important indicator plants that finding them on the shroud tell us about the geography and tell us where the shroud came from. The first one, Zygophyllum dumosum, with very typical leaves, This plant is growing only in Israel. The other plant that is a very important indicator for the origin of the shroud is this thistle. This is Gundelia tourneforti. The distribution area of the plant is only in the Near East.
Upon further study, Danin pinpoints an area where all the pollens could be found.
The fascinating thing was that the area where they could be brought together would be between Jerusalem and Hebron.
Here's what Danon's research showed us. The only place in the world where the two pollens that are found on there grow together are in direct connection. You can see the blue line represents Jerusalem, the green line and the red line are the two different types of pollens, along with that dotted line is a third one that they've got. And you can see the only place in the world where all three of those pollens grow together is in Jerusalem. It's the only place. So we begin to make this connection to Jerusalem between the dust on his feet, between the pollens that are on there. We make this connection. So here's what the New American said. Obviously, the New American is not a Christian magazine. Scientific studies validate the ancient claim that the cloth had covered the head of a long-haired, bearded man with bleeding scalp wounds who died in the upright position. Weave patterns verified first-century techniques, and residue of what is most likely myrrh and aloe have been discovered in accordance with Jewish burial customs of Jesus' time. So in a secular source, they're saying this. The cloth is a first-century Jewish man's burial cloth. It's almost impossible to get around it. It just is. So here's the question. Is it Jesus? Now, first time I met Gary and got a chance to work with him, he made this jump. We were talking and he says, well, that's easy. I'm thinking, okay, look, I know you're Gary Habermas. I know you're an expert. You've got your book written on there and all this. I know that. But man, that's a huge statement to say that's easy. And he goes, that's easy. He goes, if you're going to teach on Roman crucifixion methods in the first century, if you're teaching a Sunday school class, don't use what happened to Jesus as an example. I thought, that's an interesting, where are you going with this? He goes, well, what happened to him was very unique. There's not a single historical account that we can find, and we have hundreds of documented cases, I'm going to argue thousands probably, of Roman crucifixion methods. Not a single one of them has a crown of thorns, a spear wound, or broken legs, or non-broken legs. Not a single one of them. And he goes, so if you're teaching about Roman crucifixion methods and you want to teach it accurately in a Sunday school class, don't use what happened to Jesus because it wasn't common for that to happen to somebody. Usually they would have beaten the prisoner before they ever got him to the cross in a lot of the cases, and even if they did, they certainly would have broke his legs. In every instance we have, they broke his legs. So this one is very unique. So that begs the question, what do we find on this guy? Here's what we do know. You can see that spear wound, it's right here. And remember, this would have been the right side because it was laying on top of him. So it's backwards because of the fact that if he was laying down, you laid that cloth on, the right side's actually looking like it's on his left side. But there's the spear wound. The blood was bleeding so profusely it actually collected in the small of the back right here as he was laying on the cloth. And that's one of the other things that somebody would have had to have thought about. Okay, if blood's going to collect, why wouldn't they have just put it around here? Well, when you're laying down on the ground, that's going to, on the cloth, that's going to be a preventative measure because your skin's touching there. It would have gone to the path of least resistance where there's a hump right here in the small of your back when you're laying down. That's where the blood collected. So once again, they would have had to put a lot of thought into that. But he's got a spear wound. They even know the diameter of the spear wound and have matched it up to what would have been a Roman spear. So he's got a spear wound. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. The guy's legs aren't broken. Here's how we know this. I'm kind of breeze through a lot of stuff because you could spend 2 months talking about the Shroud of Turin and still not unpack it. I'll just simply say this. We know his nose is broken. We can see right there. That does not violate Scripture because that's cartilage. But he's got a broken nose. This eye's almost swollen so shut that it's closed. There's a lot of stuff we can know. They know his left shoulder has an open wound because it's got blood smeared versus a clean cut, which means that at some point the blood was there, dried, something was put on top of it and rubbed the blood. They know so much about this shroud. It's like I said, it's the most researched artifact that's ever been. So we know his nose is broken because we can clearly see it. We can look at his legs and nowhere on there is his legs broken. So he doesn't have his legs broken. Now the next, the crown of thorns, I would make a strong case based on this, that the crown was not some dainty little circle going around his head that the Roman guard was like, oh, this will look nice. I think he went out and got a bush. You know, it's like, hey, you go make him a crown of thorns. Why did I get stuck with this task? He's over there, poking himself. I bet you he just gathered up a bush and smashed it on the top of his head. I don't think it was this nice little dainty crown that we always see in pretty pictures. This guy's got wounds going all the way around the top of his head, the front of his head, all the way along the top and the back side. He has wounds that are very reminiscent of what it would look like if you had crown of thorn wounds going all the way around. So he's got he's got the crown of thorns, he's got the non-broken legs, and he's got the spear wound. So we have one cloth that has an image on it. There's not another cloth. Most of them rot when the carcass is beginning to deteriorate, so does the cloth along with it. We have remnants of burial cloths, but we don't have very many full burial cloths, if any, and there's none that have an image on it. And this image is connected to the 3 different items that were very unique to Christ's crucifixion and burial. So, is it Jesus? I don't know. I'm going to say this. John ran into the tomb, and the scripture says this. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. If you read the very next verse, it says, they still did not understand from scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Hold on, wait a second. Finally, the other disciple, he saw and believed, but he still didn't understand what Christ meant about him. So I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. How can he believe yet he doesn't understand what he meant? It's just my theory. Could John have ran into that tomb and saw the cloth still laid out the way it was with this scorched image and burned on there? And I'm sure at that time it was darker because we know the image is beginning to decrease. They just did a huge renovation on it trying to stop the image from disappearing. But at the time I imagine it was even darker than it is now. Could John have come in and seen this thing and just said, look, I don't understand. I still am a little confused, but yet something made him believe instantaneously that Jesus had risen from the dead. Could it have been that he came in and found this cloth laying there? I don't know. It's just speculative. But I close with this. Barry Schwartz is in my humble opinion, one of the leading experts, if not the leading expert in the world right now on the Shroud of Turin. He was part of the original team. He's a photographer, he was not a scientist, so there were people who were much more knowledgeable on the cloth than he, but they've all passed and gone now, and they've left their research to him, and so he's collected all of the research from all these different scientists from all these years and put them together, and he is arguably one of the leading experts in the world. Barry's Jewish. When you talk to him, he says, I've got no horse in this race, Dave. I'm not trying to convince you this is Jesus of Nazareth because I want you to get saved. I don't care if you get saved or not. The world's leading expert. I mean, he travels the world talking about the shroud. He goes to the largest symposiums where they gather together in heaven. He is Jewish. He doesn't care if you believe this is the cloth of Jesus. He's just simply presenting, and he convicted me to take out some of the stuff, the peer-reviewed scientific evidence that points to the validity of this being that of the shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. I say Jesus Christ, he says Jesus of Nazareth, because he doesn't believe he's the Christ. But why? So I said, Barry, you've banked your whole life and career on this. Why? Especially if you don't believe he's the Messiah. What gives? He goes, well, let me tell you a story. I said, all right. And he said, back in 1978, Alan Adler was another NASA scientist, also another Jew, who turned the corner. Him and Barry turned the corner at the same time, and then when they turned the corner, he said, we both said at the exact same time, it's a fake. And I said, well, why'd you say that? Because the blood's still red. There's blood on the cloth. It's indisputable that there's human blood on the cloth. So he said, but he said it's red. And he goes, ancient blood wouldn't be red. 2-hour-old blood starts turning black. It darkens immediately. As soon as it hits the oxygen, it just begins to turn black. This blood still has a reddish tone to it. So it can't. So then he said, for the next 20-something years, this was a sticking point for him. He's going, all the scientifically peer-reviewed evidence is all pointing towards the authenticity of the shroud being validated time and time again. But I can't get over this red blood. It doesn't, I just can't get past it, Dave. I said, so what happened? He goes, well, I'm driving down the road one day, and Alan Adler calls me. And he says, Barry, you're sitting down. And Barry said, I'm driving. He goes, well, pull over. And Barry said, okay. And he pulled his card over and he said, all right, what is it? And Alan said, I know why the blood's red. And Barry said he just saw 30 years of research just fly by. And I said, this has been the one thing the man's whole life has been bugging him. It's the thorn in his side. It can't be real. So he says, Alan, tell me what you found. Well, there's body farmers where they take decomposing dead bodies and they put them in to decompose. They'll put them in the trunk of a car or under a tree or laying in a bed, or apparently they will crucify them, which is just weird. But nonetheless, they'll do that to see how a body decomposes. And here's why. When a forensic investigator shows up on a scene and finds a dead body, he needs to know how long has the body been dead, what was the cause of death, and all that other stuff. So they study these decomposing bodies. Here's what they found. With victims of massive trauma, whether it had been beaten beyond recognition, or a loss of limbs, or a decapitation from an accident, whatever the case was, where it was a very traumatic situation happened to the victim upon death, what happens is this. The victims had bled out everything that they could possibly bleed out, and what we would call natural blood. Well, just like my knee tries to repair itself, because I've got bad cartilage in my knee, but your body can't reproduce cartilage, so my body is trying to fix itself by sending what's really just minerals down into there, and then they harden up and deposit, and it causes pitting and stuff because your body can't repair that part of itself, but it's still trying. That's the miraculous nature of how God made us, is in order for us to repair itself. When we have our sensory systems see that, they try and do that. So the body's trying to repair the fact that you can only make so much blood at a time. That's why you can only give so much at a blood drive per week, because you can only make so much at a time. You have to give very slowly, otherwise you'll outgive your blood. When you outgive your blood, out of the liver, your blood is what's left of it's passing through, and it's pulling out and it's extracting something called bilirubin out of the liver, and it's a very toxic kind of high in iron substance that's called bilirubin that begins to pull and try and feed it to the heart, so your heart can pump through the veins of blood, but the best it can pull together is bilirubin. Bilirubin is very, very, very high in iron, extremely high in iron. What they found is in the trauma victims, as the victim dies and bleeds out upon, say they put them in a car seat, and it bleeds out on the car seat, when that blood stain dries, it stays red because of the amount of iron that's in there, because the victim's not really bleeding blood anymore. Mike, I'm sitting there, I'm on the phone with a Jew. I'm ready to have church. Because I'm sitting there going, Barry, you have no idea what you're saying right now. The Bible says blood is a life source to the flesh. We know that Jesus became man for our sake in the flesh. And if blood's a life source to the flesh, I've heard a lot of sermons on it is finished, and I love every one of them. I've never heard a bad one about when he said, it is finished, and took his last breath. But to me, all of a sudden what I heard, Barry was describing the science behind it. What I heard was him say this: when Jesus was beaten to a pulp and hung on that cross and buried in that tomb, he was so badly mangled, he didn't have blood to pump through. And if blood is a life source to the flesh, and he said it is finished, could one of the things he meant by screaming that out and saying it is finished was that I have no more blood to be the perfect sacrifice anymore. I've bled to the point where my body is done. You know what that does to the gospel message for me? I'm like, I'm kind of a radical Christian. I believe in going all out. I believe in going all out. Don't stop. Don't give just a partial bit of your time, talents, and treasures. I had a real struggle with family and ministry, family first, ministry second. And I was like, I love both so much, and I want to serve God so much that I decided to have a family ministry. And so we're all involved, and I have a museum and stuff because I wanted the family to be involved, and you don't know how much that's blessed my family. So I took my family with me in ministry because I believe in going all out. Because here's the thing, he didn't bleed 99% of his blood for you. He didn't bleed 98 or 99.2. In order to extract bilirubin out of the liver, to be pumping through your system, you're done. He didn't stop. He didn't stop. He could have stopped at some point and said, okay, enough. But he didn't stop. He bled every last bit out. That's why 2,000-year-old blood still remains reddish, is because it's not quite blood anymore. And when John said he saw that water mixed with blood, there's a lot of explanations for that around the water collecting around the heart and the chest cavity and stuff. But I also wonder how much of that was because he was done. He was finished. He had no blood to give anymore. Which makes sense when you look at the Old Testament sacrifices, how they had to bleed an animal out. That just changes the dynamics of the way I hear the gospel. I don't know about for you, but for me, I'm like, I mean, it's hard enough for me to understand that he died for me when I was a meth addict and carried me out of that lifestyle. That's hard. That's a hard thing for me to wrap my mind around. But then to think how badly he was hurt. Whew. So I close with this. Everybody, I get this all the time. So what's the point? What's the point? I've gotten a little more transparent about what I think the shroud is. What you think it is, it's on you. It's between you and yourself and God. I don't care what you think it is. I just know this. We're under the greatest oppression that we've ever been in when it comes to the attacks of the mind. I mean, Christianity is being dismantled from the outside in by people who think they've got sound arguments. And a friend of mine just watched Zeitgeist for the first time, and he's a solid Christian, so luckily he watched it, and he turns around and he goes, this was just yesterday, he goes, I've never seen it before, but if I wasn't so solid in my faith, that was a really compelling argument. And I'm thinking, you have no idea how stupid the argument is, but if you don't know that, guess what? It's a really compelling argument, right? Arm yourself with the facts. So could this be, at a time in which Christianity is under attack more than ever with the mind, you know, God is dead. If you haven't seen the movie, go see it. Because God's not dead. It was based on the movie, based on the fact that we can make sound logical arguments. The Shroud of Turin can only be tested in the way that's been tested over the past 40 or 50 years. Microscopy didn't exist 100 years ago. Microscopy, what's microscopy? VPA, 3D analysis, what is that? It's only during these times that we can test it to this degree. To see that, man, this thing stands up against the largest scrutiny that's ever been thrown at anything. At the same time that the world's trying to say, not only was he not buried in the tomb, but he certainly didn't raise from the dead. So could it be that God's raising up evidences at this time that we can go, you know what? Let me tell you about something that I know, because I'm a big tangibles. I can touch this and say, I can make a case for the historicity of the resurrection. I'd love to. But now I just got my icing on the cake by saying, I believe I've got tangible evidence of something that you can't dismiss scientifically that says this man came up out of the grave by a radiation event. And I think back to Moses' face lit up so much they couldn't see that and look at him. He had to cover a veil over his face. And then on the Mount of Transfiguration, when Jesus was illuminated from head to toe, so Moses and Elijah could look him up and down and make sure he was the one that was to come. And we have these biblical precepts for this illumination. And I'm thinking, explain it away, please. Because I think you're an idiot for not believing in my gospel. That's the way I think it. So let's pray. Father God, we love you so much. Father, we're so honored on this weekend to not be sitting at a football game or sitting at a bar or watching TV. But Father, we're gathered together in your name and in your place to honor you and your resurrection this weekend. The most awesome moment in history. And here we are just worshiping you, learning about you, defending your truth. Father, we thank you for that. We thank you for giving us the heart to want to be in your presence at this time, to want to give up other things in order to just sit and be in awe of your magnificence. And Father, I pray for everybody right now, Father, that you would touch them in the way that you've touched me, and the way that you've touched other people in this room. Father, would you pour out your blessings on them? Would you show yourself magnificent in their lives? Father, I pray they would open their hearts to you to receive what you've given me and everybody else who's sitting here. We love you. Happy Resurrection Day, Jesus. Amen.
After Good Friday comes Holy Saturday, the day of waiting without hope, waiting without knowing what will come next. Go down deep into Holy Saturday, because once again you are called away storms had God to do. Without the still dark prophecy of Holy Saturday, the kind of hope message which is the resurrection of Jesus could turn simply into a shallow or angry response